When you wake up in the morning is when that cortisol pulse takes off, and something else important happens. A timer is set in your body and in your nervous system that dictates when a different hormone called melatonin, which makes you sleepy, will be secreted from a particular brain region.
Discover the ultimate morning routine for peak performance with insights from Andrew Huberman. Elevate your day with these essential habits.
When you wake up in the morning, you wake up because a particular hormone called cortisol is released from your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit right above your kidneys, and there's a little pulse of cortisol. There's also the pulse of some, and when I say a pulse, I just mean the release of a little bit. There's also a pulse of epinephrine, which is adrenaline, from your adrenals and also in your brain, and you feel awake. Now, that pulse of cortisol and adrenaline and epinephrine might come from your alarm clock. It might come from you naturally waking up. But it tends to alert your whole system in your body that it's time to increase your heart rate, it's time to start tensing your muscles, it's time to start moving about. It's very important that that cortisol pulse come early in the day, or at least early in your period of wakefulness. I say that because some people are waking up at 8 p.m. and are sleeping all day. But it's very important that that pulse of cortisol occur early in the day and that it happens all at once. It sort of sets a rising tide of cortisol in your system. Now, many of you have probably heard about cortisol in relation to stress. And indeed, as we go through our day and our life, different stressors, different events happen in our life that make us feel more alert. Some of the more stressful ones might be looking at your credit card bill and seeing what seems to be a fraudulent charge, or looking at your phone and suddenly seeing a text that something you thought was going to happen at a particular time is not going to happen, or you're running late. Those will tend to increase norepinephrine and epinephrine and adrenaline in your system.
Explore the crucial role of natural light exposure in regulating your circadian rhythm, cortisol levels, and mood. Learn to optimize your mornings for better focus and energy.
Your brain and your nervous system control whether or not you move or don't move. They control whether or not you're digesting food or you're not digesting food. They control whether or not you're stressed or not stressed, happy or sad, etc. All of that stuff that controls all that stuff is housed inside your skin and skull, etc. That might seem pretty obvious, but what that means is that for your brain and body to feel alert and focused, ready to move and exercise or do some work, or if your brain and body are going to lie down and go to sleep, well, that brain and body needs cues. It needs inputs to determine when to do those different things. And those cues and inputs arrive through a defined set of what I'll call stimuli, but you can also think of these as levers or tools. The main levers and tools that are going to allow you to control when you are awake and when you are asleep, and to get better sleep every single night, are light, literally photons, light energy. Could be from sunlight, could be from artificial light. We will discuss those particulars in a moment, as well as darkness. That is the absence of light. So we've got light and dark. Those are two very powerful tools to encourage your nervous system to be in one state or another, meaning awake or asleep. Temperature is another tool or lever. Turns out that when your body is cooling down, you have a greater tendency to fall and stay asleep. In fact, every night when you actually sleep, your body is dropping by 1 to 3 degrees, and that drop in temperature is required. It's like a gate that your body has to go through in order for you to get into sleep. And in fact, the converse is also true. If your body heats up by 1 to 3 degrees or so, you will wake up. So you've got light, dark, temperature, food. And when we say food, we mean what we eat, when we eat, and the amount that we eat. Okay, so light, dark, temperature, food, exercise. And of course, exercise comes in different forms. We can do cardiovascular exercise. That can be low intensity, long distance exercise. It can be high intensity, so-called high intensity interval training. It could be weight training. It could be yoga. It could be swimming, any number of different activities. But exercise in general causes an increase in body temperature and tends to make us more alert, not just during the exercise, but in the immediate hours after that exercise. Exercise does some other things that relate to our sleep as well, and we'll talk about those today and how you can leverage them. Another potent lever for adjusting your sleepiness and wakefulness is caffeine. This, of course, comes as no surprise to people, but why and how caffeine works might come as a surprise. Very briefly, we have a molecule in our body called adenosine, and the longer we have been awake, the more adenosine builds up in our brain and body, and adenosine is part of the reason why we get sleepy. Caffeine effectively operates as a adenosine antagonist. It works by basically occupying the receptor for adenosine, so it's a little bit of a convoluted mechanism, but basically all you need to know is that caffeine prevents the actions of adenosine. That's one of the reasons why caffeine makes us feel alert. But how much caffeine we drink and when we drink caffeine turns out to be vitally important for adjusting our wakefulness and for optimizing our sleep. So we'll talk about that as well. The other category of lever tools, which are immensely powerful for optimizing sleep, are supplements. There now exist as many as 8 different supplements that can powerfully modulate sleep in healthy ways and that have huge margins for safety.
Discover the science behind delaying caffeine intake, cold showers, and exercise in enhancing alertness and mood. Uncover how these practices create a summer environment inside your body, boosting dopamine, epinephrine, and core body temperature for an energized start to your day.
Let's start this 24-hour cycle with when you wake up in the morning. So for some of you, that will be 5 a.m. For others of you, that will be 10 a.m. Most people, I believe, wake up sometime between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. But regardless of when you wake up in the morning, one of the first things that happens is that your body temperature is increasing. And that's just going to happen naturally. Some of it is going to be the consequence of your moving around a bit, but really the increase in body temperature is one of the main triggers for why you woke up in the first place. That increase in body temperature, in turn, causes an increase in the release of a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is often discussed as a stress hormone, but it's not just associated with stress. It also enhances your immune system, provided cortisol is elevated at the right times. And the right time for cortisol to be elevated is when you first wake up in the morning. That increase in cortisol is also going to increase metabolism. It's also going to increase your ability to focus mentally and for you to move your body. So again, cortisol is often demonized and considered this bad thing. And indeed, you don't want cortisol to be chronically or consistently elevated throughout the day or night. But you do want cortisol to reach its peak early in the day, right about the time you wake up. One way that you can ensure that that cortisol peak occurs early in the day, right about the time that you wake up, is to view bright light, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. That's right. View bright sunlight within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. I'll get into all the caveats about what happens if you wake up before the sun is out. What if you live in the UK where there is no sun, or people claim there is no sun? Hate to tell you this, folks, but there is sun in the UK. We'll talk about all that. But everybody, whether or not you live in a cloudy place or a sunny place, whether or not there's cloud cover or not that day, should really strive to get bright light in your eyes, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. The reason for that is very simple. You want to trigger that cortisol increase to occur very early in your day. And you don't want that cortisol peak to happen later, which is what will happen if you wait to get outside and see sunlight. The reason for this is that you have a set of neurons, nerve cells in your eye. They're called intrinsically photosensitive melanopsin cells, but you do not need to know that name. Those neurons respond best to bright light, and especially right after waking early in the day, they are best able to signal to a set of neurons that reside over the roof of your mouth, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a cluster of neurons that then sends a huge number of other signals, electrical and chemical, out to your entire body that triggers that cortisol increase, provides a wake-up signal for your brain and body, and sets in motion a timer for you to fall asleep later that night. So again, we're not trying to go into too much mechanism today. We are trying to really hammer on tools, and I'll substantiate those tools just a bit with some mechanism. But here's what you do, or at least here's what I do. I wake up in the morning and I want to reach for my phone. But I know that even if I were to crank up the brightness on that phone screen, it's not bright enough to trigger that cortisol spike and for me to be at my most alert and focused throughout the day and to optimize my sleep at night. So what I do is I get out of bed and I go outside. And if it's a bright, clear day and the sun is low in the sky, or the sun is, starting to get overhead, what we call low solar angle, then I know I'm getting outside at the right time. If there's cloud cover and I can't see the sun, I also know I'm doing a good thing, because it turns out, especially on cloudy days, you want to get outside and get as much light energy or photons in your eyes. But let's say it's a very clear day and I can see where the sun is. I do not need to stare directly into the sun. If it's very low in the sky, I might do that because it's not going to be very painful to my eyes. However, if the sun is a little bit brighter and a little bit higher in the sky, sometimes it can be painful to look at. So the way to get this sunlight viewing early in the day is to look toward the sun. If it's too bright to look at directly, well, then don't do that. You just look toward it, but not directly at it. It's absolutely fine to blink. In fact, I encourage you to blink whenever you feel the impulse to blink. Never look at any light, sunlight or otherwise, that's so bright that it's painful to look at, because you can damage your eyes. But for this morning sunlight viewing, it's best to not wear sunglasses. That's right, to not wear sunglasses, at least for this morning sunlight viewing. It is absolutely fine to wear eyeglasses or contact lenses, so-called corrective lenses. In fact, those will serve you well in this practice or this tool, because they will focus the light onto your neural retina and onto those melanopsin intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells. If your eyeglasses or contact lenses have UV protection, that's okay. There's so many different wavelengths of light coming from the sun, and they are bright enough that they will trigger the mechanisms that you want triggered at this early time of day. So try and get outside, ideally within the first 5 minutes of waking, or maybe it's 15 minutes, but certainly within the first hour after waking.